Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpain. You know, Don's had quite a career in radio and television, where he's been an air personality, a news anchor, even a TV weatherman.
And John's been a college professor. He's written several books, and he's been an editor and features writer at the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper.
We first teamed up for a radio show in college. On one show, we introduced a soothing musical interlude.
But we stumbled, and it came out Musical Innertube.
And that became the name for this here podcast, where we talk with interesting people about their interesting lives. Difference makers who really make a difference.
Our guest today is Kiki Soto, and there's a little bit of a setup for bringing Kiki in. How are you today, Kiki?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm fine. Kiki and I met back in 1973. Now, most of you know that John and I started the Musical Innertube on KUCI, the radio station at the University of California at Irvine. But actually, that's where John went to school. I was moonlighting. I actually was working at the radio station where I went to school, which was Loyola Marymount University. KXLU was that station, and I was the student manager. And around about 1973, I was seeking to expand it because it had been a club for a long time and had played classical music. And it didn't go on the air until 6 o'clock at night. It only stayed on until midnight. And it was shut down every time the student body took a vacation, all summer long and all Christmas long. And I wanted to expand the hours, put it on as many hours as I could and leave it on during the summer. So I started looking for other options for other students to come in with other kinds of music. And Kiki was one of the ones that responded to that. He came into my office with a couple of friends and said that he'd like to put salsa on the air. And Kiki, my question now to you is, why did you want to put salsa music on the air?
Basically, there were no outlets for musicians and artists. And I'll be honest, I grew up on rock music, Dylan, Doors, Stones. And but I always kept searching for something different, and I had caught into this music that I couldn't hear anywhere. So I was digging around. I figured, hey, if it's not happening, make it happen. So that was the idea, was to be able to introduce different artists who have something to. I always believe that everyone's got something to bring to the party. And I thought there was really good music that was being left out, or at least not being exposed. And that was the purpose of the show, was to help artists get their music out there. I could use Los Lobos as an example. Before they became nationally known, they were exactly the way their first album was described, just another band from East LA. And we actually did an interview with them way back then. And over time, then they broke out. And now most people know them because they play multiple genres. They actually have an excellent CD called The Drive, which has a mixture of country, R&B, salsa, straightaway pop, and very creative individuals. But way before, they didn't have any exposures, so we were basically playing some of their music to get them out there.
And the program that Kiki's referring to is the program that came out of that meeting that we had on KXLU. It was a program that took over the weekends, basically, on that college station, called Alma Del Barrio, and it is still going today. And that's one of the reasons that we wanted to talk to Kiki today. It has been a phenomenon in the Los Angeles radio market. And I'm just interested in why a salsa program, which seems to be niche programming at its very best, is still going so strong so many years later.
There's a number of things. I was a business major. I wasn't into, I loved music, but I wasn't trained for communication arts. So I partnered with Raul Villa, who's the co-founder, and he was a communication arts major, but he didn't want to do any announcing. And so we figured, let's run with it. And the reason why I think it was successful was it wasn't personal branding. Many times you get a show that this is Joe Salsa's program. And then the minute they leave, the show leaves. And I built it for sustainability. I applied a lot of business principles. And then when I went for a master's in business, I applied many of those principles also to develop it almost like a business. I looked at the inputs. You need musical product, you need DJs, you need the outlet, which is the time, which I kept knocking on Don's door to get more time. Now it's 12 hours on Saturday and 12 hours on Sunday in the LA market, but also nationally because of KXLU.com. And the financial support is there. The people got behind the show. It's also community-based. We call everyone family or La Familia. And from the get-go, it runs along that concept of mi casa es su casa, my house is your house. It's the same thing. We're all family, and we don't look at it as just strictly a Hispanic market. The show was bilingual, actually mostly in English, and it was designed to open the music up to people who are non-Hispanic. So roughly, we've estimated probably about a third of the audience is not of Hispanic descent, but they love, let's talk about musicians. John's a musician, and he might look at a particular type of instrument and remember a particular artist, and that artist becomes the entry into the music. As you delve into that artist, suddenly this world opens up to you and you just keep going. Others are professional dancers or just love to dance. And if you look at all of the programming that occurs in terms of professional dancing and competitions, most of them are Latin music dancing, rumba, cha-cha-cha, mambo, the tango, which is out of Argentina. So it's music is universal. I think where people hit a roadblock is with the Spanish, if there's Spanish lyrics, but there's also a lot of music that's instrumental and bilingual. So there's a number of things that made the show click. But on top of that, we had strong support. And I was mentioning to Don previously that we had some strong support out of Hollywood. Should I give him the Bresner story?
Go ahead.
Early in the 70s, well, people might know the movie Good Morning Vietnam. One of the producers is Larry Bresner. He's passed. Condolences to his family. But he used to come up to the station when he was working for Charles Joffrey Productions, and he used to sit in and critique. He'd sit there, but he loved dancing to salsa music. He picked that up at the Palladium in New York City. And so we had strong support across the board, but actually quite a bit of support from what was known as Mambo Nicks, professional dancers or people out of the Palladium on the East Coast who loved the music and had migrated to the West Coast. So we had our friends in the Hollywood Hills, that type of thing, who helped support us. In fact, they used to give us some of their memorabilia as premiums when we do fundraisers, which I compliment Don because he opened up that door to be 24/7, whereas the station was student funded in terms of fees during the school year. And when there were no students in the summer, there was no summer school, there was no funding. And so you'd build the market and then shut it down for 3 months and rebuild it again. So it was an interesting experience until we got to the 24/7. But that's courtesy of Don, so kudos.
So Kiki, so you do 12 hours on Saturday and 12 hours on Sunday. And I was just using my old Texas Instruments calculator, and that's 24 hours, I think, of music. Do you have a staff now of presenters? How do you do that?
Actually, what was happening was when we were always looking for additional DJs. Now, Don will attest to you that we started with 1 hour with about 4 DJs. So for wannabes. Anyway, and as we kept building, we were always looking for additional students. But students graduate and they go off into either a career, grad school, law school, whatever. And so you always had to replenish. But there were also alumni who remained with the show or remained as backups. So actually now they've reached a point where you've got enough DJs where you do 4-hour shifts and you do it every other weekend. So there's staffing there to carry it. But when we started out, we were a skeleton crew. So there were times where I'd be in there 8, 12 hours. Good thing we weren't union scale. Everyone was volunteers. I think that's a differential because you either have to love it or you won't last. Because if you take individuals in their early 20s and take away their weekend, every weekend, that takes commitment. Otherwise, you'd rather be at the beach or at the party or whatever. And we would have to pre-program our shows because one of the premises was also not to be a jukebox. So that's why when I mentioned material labor, material is actually the product. And we were always looking for new product. And it's hard to get promotional items when you're in a college station and doing a show that hadn't proven itself yet. So that was a challenge. But kudos to the show. It always has had the staffing. The pandemic's created a problem with that because everything's gone remote. And when they finally open up, hopefully soon, it's going to be a challenge to bring back people back into the studio because you do get used to sweats and slippers.
Now, we mentioned salsa music as sort of an umbrella term to talk about all the different kinds of Hispanic music that you guys play. But salsa is sort of an umbrella term, right? There's not a specific kind of music necessarily that's salsa. It's sort of, there's a mixture of all sorts of different Hispanic music in there from various countries and various styles. Is that right?
Correct. That basically, the word salsa is more of it's a great marketing tool. People have used it in songs prior to it really becoming popular, which is starting around the 70s. It's about the time we came in. But there's so many different types of rhythms. If you're into different types of dance rhythms, I believe you've heard of Tito Puente. He's known for being a great percussionist, and he was influenced by Gene Krupa, a drummer who was featured in these jazz bands.
Oh, absolutely. Gene Krupa, the great drummer for Benny Goodman and many others. Yes, indeed.
Right. Well, he used to come out after the band was set up, so he was the star of the show. And that's when Tito Puente wanted to emulate that by having what he plays, I guess they're called timbales. And that's similar to what you'd see Sheila E. playing. And that used to be an instrument that was in the background of a group, not in the forefront. And he moved it to the front, and he wanted to be Gene coming out and, getting the applause and being the name act. And he has an excellent album called Dance Mania. It's an old album. There's some newer versions, but it's the best one that I would say that has a multiple types of rhythms. Like I mentioned, mambo, rumba, cha-cha-cha. And he experiments with different things, vibes. He plays vibes as well as percussion. So it's considered a classic dance album. But if you're looking to find the different types of rhythms that get thrown into this big bag, that's an excellent source. I think it came out 50s, I think late 50s, but it's an excellent album. It's called Dance Mania. And we were talking, Don and I talked before about ZZ Top, the group Gibbons. He when he was small, he used to bang around with pencils, sticks, and his dad told him, hey, if you're going to be doing that, you might as well learn from the best. And he had him study with Tito Puente for a while. So we all, I think what people don't understand is we're all listening to each other and drawing from the experience. And, we find things that we like, or we hear something, but we hear it differently, and we come back with a whole nother version of it. You mentioned, I'll give you we were talking about some clips that I sent to Don on different artists, but the influence into rock music is there. People just don't know it. There's rhythms behind it and melodies, but people don't know where it came from. They just enjoy it. So my premise is music is a universal language. You just have to put it out there. But we also did quite a bit of educating. We talk about the artist or the source of the music. And I had put myself as a consumer in someone's shoes. If I hear something I like, but I can't find it, I can't find the album, I don't know the name, then it becomes frustrating. So the idea was to facilitate all of that, allow people to know the name of the song. Some of the people who didn't speak Spanish would phone in and ask us, how do you spell that? Who's the artist's name? What's the name of the song? And then they'd ask, where can I buy the album? Where can I, so we started a calendar of events it would run once on Saturday and once on Sunday. And it would just go the whole gamut of not just places where individuals were performing, also where there were free dance lessons. Also, we would do cultural events like plays, and we'd actually bring people in terms of things like, theater and do interviews. So we were trying to be all inclusive. I even told Don, we experimented in news after he left. But that was a disaster because it was more like, here's the highlights of the past week, because we only had one guy trying to do it, and it's you need a major crew. But if we got an idea, we just tried it out. That's the nice thing of non-commercial radio, is that you can dive in, you can give it a shot, and if it doesn't pan out, that's fine. But you can't. You don't have that flexibility in commercial radio, and I've worked in both, and it's just a lot more. It's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work too.
Yeah, if people would like to go to KXLU.com, and there is a drop-down box for Alma Del Barrio, and you can click on that. And if you do, there are some videos there of some community events, some celebrations that the station has sponsored. The last one was in 2019 before the COVID hit. And you can see a lot of faces in that crowd enjoying the music, dancing, celebrating, having a good time. And they're not necessarily Hispanic. So I think that goes to what you were saying, Kiki, about music being a universal language.
Yeah, and people like a good time too. but no, it's a free concert, and we would. Actually, I give credit to the current members of the station and the moderator, and they put together a nice concert. It's usually about 4 groups, 4 to 5, and there's also a Brazilian hour that's built into the programming, and so they'll have a Brazilian group, but prior to the Brazilian group performing, they'll have samba lessons. And then after that, there's also salsa lessons that they give for free. And then the other groups are in that salsa bag. So you've got free dance lessons, and they have the food trucks and a ton of booths, and it becomes it's a family affair. No drugs, no booze, and children are invited, and it becomes a family affair. It's a thank you to the listening audience who's stayed with them in terms of supporting the show. So it's a nice gesture, and it's become somewhat of a staple until the pandemic. But kudos to everyone involved with producing that one.
Now, John, you knew some of the when we were talking before we went on the air, and Kiki was mentioning some of the artists that were featured. You knew some of these artists, John, and again, it's a situation where we're talking about music that comes from all sorts of different countries. Kiki mentioned the Brazilian hour, but there's also salsa from Puerto Rico, and all sorts of other sources like that.
Yeah, we got started talking about, that question that Kiki brought up, which is always very difficult to answer, is, where did salsa come from? Which always leads to the question, what is salsa? And of course, it's almost impossible to answer because it's so many tributaries flow to it. And not all of them are from Spanish-speaking countries, as Kiki knows better than I do. I mean, there's European elements in it. Obviously, when you get into this hemisphere, the islands have a lot to do with it, and the various South American countries, including the incredible sort of very different cultures of Brazil and Argentina. And what were you saying that Kiki, that other countries have been incorporating salsa elements into their music?
It actually, if we move away from the word salsa, much of the music incorporates what you would consider jazz with Latin rhythms. If you took out the rhythm section and just listened to the horns, it's a whole different ball game. There's I shared some links with Don on a PBS show called Latin Music USA. It was like a 4-part series, but the key is that it starts out with quite a bit of fusion music occurring in Harlem. There's Spanish Harlem, and these many Cuban and Puerto Rican musicians would migrate into the bands of major jazz musicians, and then they would take that experience. Some of them were arrangers. I believe there's an individual by the name of Mario Bauza. That's Mario Bauza. He's a phenomenal arranger. He arranged for jazz groups, but he also arranged for his brother-in-law, an individual by the name of Machito. And Mario Bauza describes the music as the rhythm, as a lemon meringue pie. The rhythm is on the bottom, but the jazz is on top. And what they did was fuse that. So there's always this cross-culturalization. And we all listen to each other and just pick up things or take something of yours and make it our own. And that's what started happening. But there's so many different countries that have also brought the music in. You also, I understand, John, you also play guitar, right?
Some people say that I do. Yes, I mean, I'm really a flutist first and foremost, but yes, I play the guitar a lot. Uh-huh.
Well, if you start looking at flamenco guitar, there's those influences, but there's also very traditional, what I would call guitar instruments in other places, like out of Puerto Rico. There's a little, it looks like almost like a ukulele, different sound. It's called a tres.
A tres, yes, indeed.
And so you have all of these different instruments that artists start to incorporate. They incorporate traditional with the current, and they do it in a creative way, and it becomes their own sound. And so there's many of the instruments are not tied to, I would say, one particular land, because they've floated around. And even with people like what do you know? You know Gabor Szabo?
Yes, Gabor Szabo. Yes, absolutely.
If you look at Santana's Black Magic Woman, there's a second part to it, and that was written by him. So even in rock music, you have these influences coming in. So it's hard to parse it out. That's why it's so easy to use a big bag called salsa. I don't know if you've ever heard of, there's an artist named Willie Colon. He's a trombonist, but he also used to do arrangements for soundtracks, movie soundtracks. So he's out of the Bronx, but he is just exceptional when it comes to brass instruments, and he does a lot of arranging. But he's the one who said, I quote him, "We put all of this into one big bag," because way in the past, 40s, 50s, it was mambo, then it was cha-cha-cha, then it was, these eras were marked by particular dance rhythms, and then they finally just threw everything in one big bag. And salsa, let's face it, it's a great marketing because the word salsa is already out there. You're just applying it to a musical version. To me, it's branding, but I'm a business major, so I would think that way.
And it's interesting too, because when you follow the history of it, not only is there influence from different countries, but there's influence within this country. You have the kind of jazz that was played, Latin jazz that was played in New York. There's a different kind of Latin jazz in Miami. There's a different kind in Texas, the Tejada, is it? And some of the Mexican influence from Southern California. So even within this country, there are different brands of Hispanic music.
Well, think about who was in different places. I'll use an example. There's another type of music called banda, which is a Mexican style music. They have tubas, accordions. They're basically a German polka, but they have Spanish lyrics. But that's because when Texas belonged to Mexico, there was a German population in Texas, and they played their polkas. Because a tuba is not an indigenous instrument, so it was adopted. And so you have people influencing each other, and it's occurred throughout time. So everything evolves. So with the German polka, the accordion was streamlined by the Germans, but the Mexicans kept the huge one with all the buttons and everything.
Yes. And
it's basically, if you just tune out the Spanish lyrics, you're listening to a German polka. So it's we influence each other, whether rhythmically, in terms of instruments. If we like a sound, we adopt it, maybe rework it. There's just so much influence back and forth, and I have a very restless ear. I told Don that I listen to everything, and I'm eclectic that way. But what I found with the Latin music is the rhythms are more complex. If you're a dancer, it's it's more up tempo usually, but even the slow songs are very romantic. How did they describe the tango? It's like safe sex. So there's certain things about the music that I find very interesting. Like the jazz overlay is more complex. If you really break down the songs and the music, there's some really beautiful stuff out there. Even the style danson is very classical. It's got flutes and violin. It's a Cuban style that would have, you can hear that classical training that the artists have. And most of these artists, if you look at many of the jazz artists that are Hispanic, they're classically trained, but they've migrated into combining traditional with their training and create things. And that's, to me, it's something to bring to the party. And I think that's part of the reason why the show's lasted. It's going to start its 49th year in October. And to be able to do that 24 hours every weekend and all on volunteer staff really says quite a bit, both in terms of commitment of the people, but the enjoyment. You know, if you love the music, you don't mind going on air. And I think that's the motivation, that passion, and the support of people out there. And the interesting thing is each DJ has a 4-hour block, and you'll sense each DJ's different personality. So it's like one big show, but it's, you know, it's running the same vein, but with each one has a different spin to it. And then the other thing is, I didn't tell Don this one before, but I actually wrote like a clock. In commercial radio, you have your clock with when to run certain spots, and you have these blocks of time in between that you program. And I wrote a suggested format of mix on the songs, instrumentals, more jazz, a little more towards a country feeling. And I wrote that, and I also wrote some rules for the group that was working, because some of our albums were finding their way into parties and coming back less playable.
Yes, altered in a not so great way.
Right. But you recognize college volunteers, college students.
Yes. At least they brought them back. At KCI, they never did.
Well, I remember someone dropped one behind the control board, and it was so I think Don remembers the old control board with the gap between the wall and the.
Oh yeah, the emphasis there is the word old.
Old, yeah. You had it was the old pods that you'd turn instead of
the big knobs instead of the little slides up and down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about the influence. Obviously, you know, if it's been going for 49 years. There's you and me and the people our age that started it, and then the volunteer students that have filled in since then. And there doesn't seem to be a lack of enthusiasm. How does it pass on from generation to generation? Is it just an appreciation of the music? Do kids get into that music once they hit a certain age?
You know, I talked to one of the DJs. I was listening to a student DJ, and I phoned in, and I said that, you know, I complimented them because they had a really good mix of music. I'm a critic, no, but I'm always listening or putting my 2 cents in. I complimented her, and she said that she knew the music because her parents would play the music. And it was one of those things that I'm third generation, so you migrate away from, music that your parents listen to, and you go off in your own world. But I think you reach a point where you start going, you pick up you remember a song, and you say, "Oh, that's a good rhythm," And so you start coming full circle and re-exploring what you were exposed to. And when you re-explore, then you find it generational that I think many of the people listening to the show, it's passed from generation to generation. And some of those people are students and they wind up working at the station. The biggest thing is, they want to move on. And so you always have to be replenishing. I'm not sure what the pandemic is going to do to that cycle, because it's people have gotten used to not doing the commute. And LMU, Loyola Marymount, is not an easy commute. It's near LAX, LA International Airport. So it's it's going to be interesting how the commitment falls out. But I think they have enough DJs to cover, even if some of them, I know a couple of them have splintered off. And I'm not sure if alumni have hung in there as much, but I think there'll be a resurgence. It's a lot of fun to do, and if you're doing every other weekend, it's much easier. When you're doing every single weekend, that's the challenge. And I think it's going to be challenging when students go back with everything else they have to do to stay safe under the pandemic situation. It was starting to accelerate here in LA County. So we'll see where it goes.
Back in my salsa dancing days, because I did take lessons and I did do a fair amount of salsa dancing at Cuba Libre in Philadelphia. But I was hanging out at the bar with a guy who was from Cuba, and he was a musician. And he said, well, you know what I think? The way that I think about salsa, and this is exactly what he said, the way that I think about salsa is, of all musics, it's in many ways the most American, because it's a melting pot. Everybody has something to say. Everybody has a way of playing, and somehow it arises in a salsa universe. So, and that was a beautiful thing to hear him say, because, of course, he plays salsa every night. This guy, he had just finished a set with a band, and he was telling me that this music, which so many people would look at and call Latin music or Latino music, whatever they would, he was saying, yeah, this strikes me as very American. I thought it was very moving. It's
actually true. I mean, the rhythms are very much African, coming from slaves, but there were slaves not just in the U.S., there were in all of the Latin American countries also. So there's that incorporation. And then on top of that, there's the jazz elements and arrangements. There's actually, our show used to be bootlegged to South America. We found out that they were recording our shows and they were showing up on air in South America, and we didn't really care at the time. But a lot of people have borrowed the name. The name actually means, there's an old song called Heart and Soul. It's like an old, kind of on the bluesy side. And we were trying to capture the heart and soul of the music, but who we were also trying to say the music of the neighborhood. And that's where the name Alma Del Barrio came from. And we're just trying to capture the essence of what people listen to and actually assimilate. You'll find, even now, you have rap songs in Spanish, and there's so many things going on. We're always mixing. People don't see it, but it's there. In fact, there was one individual, he was from South Africa. He's now doing a show called Groove Time at KXLU. It's the Caribbean, African, and even salsa music. And he said when he was coming back to the U.S., they told him that they had to listen to Alma Del Barrio because if he was really into the rhythms. And so, there's certain testaments to the show and its influence and outreach and how people share it. So if people want to give it a try, Actually, if you like any type of music, courtesy of Don and his programming, KXLU.com, if you look at their schedule, it runs the full gamut. Whatever you're looking for, they probably have it. But if you'd like to taste the Latin music side, it's Pacific time, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday. So, the invite's out there. It's always been there. Just if you want it, if you want to experiment, take a dive. I'm like anyone else. I dove into jazz. I dove into rock. I'm all over the place, but just an affinity for this one because it never got the exposure that I think it should have. And now the show is known as the Granddaddy because I think across the country, there's nothing like it. There's nothing that's lasted so long and introduces Latin music in a way that educates and provides an open door and a sharing. I like to I listen to those creative experimentations where they take that and a rock musician might incorporate something.
Kiki, thanks very much for talking to us today.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Yeah.
It's an amazing story with Alma Del Barrio. And again, KXLU.com. You can listen to it online. They have a streaming channel for you to listen to, and you can listen on the weekends to Alma Del Barrio. And thanks again to Kiki Soto, who came up with the show, got it up, got it running on the air, and has made sure that it is still running on the air for your enjoyment. Thanks again, Kiki.
Thank you. Both of you stay safe, please, and we'll get back in touch.
Thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Check out our website at musicalinnertube.com, where you'll find all our episodes, profiles of our guests, and lots of extras. You'll even be able to leave us a voicemail.
Our email address is musicalinnertube@gmail.com. On Twitter, our handle is MInnertube. Capitalize the M and I.
The Innertube is available on Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, and iHeartRadio podcasts. Like us and give us a good review on any of those platforms.
And as always, thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for our theme music.